Good day, Escape Pod listeners. Welcome to this edition of our Escape Bites mini-sodes, where today we have a mini competition going on. I'm Julie.
I'm Charity. Do we have a button that goes pew 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 pew?
We do not.
Can we do one?
We have like...
Yeah!
Oh, it
we
is
have it.
kind
Yes.
of.
Okay, ready?
Ooh, that was really loud.
We're
Apologies.
battling it out today.
Loud in my ear. So, again, I'm Julie here with Charity, and our behind-the-scenes assistant, KB, came up with various topics with the instruction that we each had to find a true story to match it. These are not. There's no comedy in these.
We don't, and we also don't know what each other is doing.
No.
Yeah.
I know you won't have mine, or at least from this angle, because it's kind of hits close to home.
Okay.
In a weird way. So mine is humorless. I'm just going to put that out there. And
mine's not funny either.
No. So there is no comedy in these traumedies. But when this topic was drawn from the bowl of topics that we draw from, I immediately thought of this case. So that I covered as a news reporter many, many years ago. So to say it stuck with me is kind of an understatement.
Oh.
So the topic was criminals who were victims first. Criminals who are victims first. So that's probably pretty common.
Pretty high percentage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Because like very few people have like perfect childhoods and then are terrible adults.
Yeah.
It does happen, but not super often. So I'm pretty sure you are okay with me going first.
Yeah.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm pretty sure I've referenced this case before in saying that the defense used the defendant's troubled childhood and abuse he suffered as a child as a mitigating factor in trying to change the punishment that had been handed down, which was the death penalty. So this was a capital case here in South Dakota. Please be advised that it's really out of character for me, but some of what we're going to discuss is extremely disturbing. So these are not usually the cases I try to find.
No.
I try to find like silly ones, and I can't today. So quick recap of the case itself. 3 people, 18-year-old at the time, 18-year-old Elijah Page, 19-year-old Briley Piper, and 20-year-old Daryl Hoadley were charged with the murder of 19-year-old Chester Allan Poage in the woods outside of Spearfish, South Dakota, back in March of 2000. The 4 young men were friends/acquaintances. So I think it is safe to say that somebody isn't your friend
Frenemies.
if you beat them, make them drink acid, stab them, and leave them for dead in a cold creek in March in South Dakota.
No.
So that is what these young men, not only what they were accused of doing, but what they basically admitted to doing.
Tell me their ages again.
They were all either 18, 19, or 20.
Okay.
Page and Piper pleaded guilty in that case and opted to be sentenced by a judge. They were both given the death penalty by the judge. Hoadley took his chances with a jury, and the jury sentenced him to life in prison. And he remains in the state penitentiary in South Dakota today. So trying to make what could be a very long story a little bit shorter, I'll just say that Elijah Page chose to end his appeals in 2006, and he was executed in the state of South Dakota in 2007. Briley Piper is still on death row. And he's the only person on death row in our state at this time, but he has appealed his case and his sentence many, many, many times. So
on what grounds?
The murder, every ground. I mean, he's various appeals have been made.
So this is where the childhood trauma comes in.
Some of it comes in, yep. So he's appealed his case many times. The murder was 25 years ago, and he is still on death row. So remember, he first opted to be sentenced by a judge. I remember pretty well, covering a hearing where his attorneys were arguing for a resentencing. And one of their arguments was basically, it's not fair that defendants who committed the same crime got 2 different sentences. So Piper and Page got the death penalty, Hoadley got life in prison. I recall in that hearing that one of Piper's earlier attorneys, they've also changed many times, so not the attorneys appealing the case, but some of the first ones who represented him. One of them said that he believed at the time that Piper pleaded guilty, that a judge would hand down a more favorable sentence than a jury would. And he commented that jurors would be more emotional about the circumstances of the crime. So he thought a judge would not be as emotional, but a jury of this boy's
it was
peers,
heinous, no matter.
it was heinous
Yes.
that they would be more emotional. So he advised the judge, right? The circumstances were awful, not wrong about that. So the legal team really thought the judge was the way to go, but they turned out to be wrong. And the judge sentenced Briley Piper to death. Fast forward to 2009, the South Dakota Supreme Court ruled in Briley Piper's favor in that they agreed that he could be resentenced by a jury. So it didn't change the conviction. It didn't change his plea. Nothing along those lines. What it changed was, okay, you go ahead and be resentenced. You're going to be resentenced by a jury.
But it could come out the same.
Yep, absolutely. So, spoiler alert. Following his resentencing hearing in the summer of 2011, which I covered in the courthouse actually right across the street from where we record this podcast, the jury also sentenced him to death. Getting to our topic, though, for the day about criminals who were victims first. At the resentencing hearing, Briley Piper's mom testified. And she told the jury that although he was born prematurely, he ended up being a bigger than average kid. And she thought that had something to do with how teachers and others dealt with him. Like they didn't, you would take it as like they thought he was older than he was, so they had expectations that he would behave.
Those interpersonal responses were different.
He just, the prosecuting attorney just basically said like he was a bully. I mean, they have
was
very
he the
two
ringleader
different
of
perspectives.
this?
So there's two competing arguments about that. Initially, it was that, yes, he was, that Briley Piper was the ringleader. And then the other defendants kind of came out later and said, oh, well, no, it was really Elijah Page. And that, I believe that came out after Page was executed. So it's like, well, what's true?
Yeah.
Just not okay. They all had opportunities to change this boy's fate, to not end his life, and none of them took that opportunity. So mom testifies, and the Rapid City Journal reporter covering the resentencing, the late, great Andrea Cook, so may she rest in peace, reported that when the defense attorney asked Linda Piper how she dealt punishment to her kids, she said she, quote, had a belt, a switch, and a piece of plastic racetrack.
Holy crap.
That was from a toy. So the quote was, the Hot Wheels track worked best, is what she said.
Oh, have you ever been slapped with something like that? I can feel it.
Nope. I think I was spanked twice as a child.
Wow.
That's what I can remember. And I probably deserved it both times, for sure. I actually remember my brother and sister were getting in trouble, and I started to laugh. And I got sent to my room, and I just got a little swat on the way out the door.
Yeah.
And it hurt my feelings more than it hurt my butt.
Yeah, just a lesson, not
not
beating.
funny. Like, I'll remind you it's not funny kind of thing. But no, nothing like this. Yeah. So Piper's siblings did not testify. However, 2 of the 3 had been interviewed by a mitigation specialist who did testify at the resentencing. So Jeanette Sheldon was her name, of Arizona, and she told the jury that the siblings recalled being beaten by their mother. A brother even accused their mother of making up reasons to punish the children. Which is really sad. So
the things that were done to him, he was doing to this poor victim.
Well,
that's the argument they're trying to make.
I mean, that's some of what they're saying, but I think it is clear from this that Briley Piper was a victim in his own way too, but to the extent that he victimized his victim who died, I mean, not even close. In virtually everything you read, looking back on that case, torture is almost always part of those stories because it was not a quick and painless death. It was extended. And that's really hard to bring up in my memories too. But it is safe to say his was not a happy childhood. That is for sure. So I think one thing that we see too often, people who were like bad kids who become worse adults, and end up doing something really bad as adults is the lack of help sometimes that they received as kids.
Yeah.
So, for example, Linda Piper was encouraged to get Briley into therapy. She refused. She testified that of her 4 kids, he was the most loving. And it's like she just didn't believe that he was that bad. Like, she just didn't buy it. But he had been accused, even as a young person, of pulling a knife on a fellow student, among other things. So he was troubled. He did need professional help, in my personal opinion. And she, for the most part at the time, just didn't agree. She just didn't see it. From Andrea's story in the Rapid City Journal, when the state's attorney accused Linda Piper of enabling her son's conduct, Briley Piper's mother responded simply, "Maybe I am the reason."
Oh, that just gave me goosebumps.
As recently as February 2025, I know. That is, when you're a mom,
especially
like,
if you
that's
have
heartbreaking.
remorse and you like whatever was going on in your life and you did those things. And
And now you're like, now I'm in a courtroom where my kid's literally fighting for his life.
oh my God.
And even if he succeeds, he's not getting out. Like, at best, it's probably
I even
life
think
in
about
prison.
that, like with my dad. I have my suspicions, but I don't know exactly what happened to him as a kid. All I know is when he would discipline me, he'd lose control.
Oh, okay.
And so it's like, what is that anger and that hatred and that, that act where it would like fuel itself, and then pretty soon he's just out of control and there's no way I'm coming out on the winning side of that. It's not discipline, it was beatings.
Yeah.
And so I think about that with what the story that you're telling, like it's very likely, he didn't know any different. This mother, maybe this is how, but that whole notion of like coming up with reasons to discipline, at least that's the children's perspectives.
Right.
Our stories actually have a lot of similarities today. So
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. So just to wrap this up, as recently as February of this year, 2025, Briley Piper's legal team made another attempt to get him off death row with an appeal in federal court. They made a rather unusual argument, and it was pretty complicated. And to me, and apparently to U.S. District Judge Roberto Lang, simply grasping at straws. That's you could just one of the stories I read, it was just very clear he was very skeptical that this was going to go anywhere. In March, Judge Lang rejected Piper's federal petition for a writ of habeas corpus, denying the claims that Piper's counsel was ineffective and denying the demand to overturn the death sentence. According to the South Dakota Attorney General's office, Piper can appeal that decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit. In the news release following that decision, Attorney General Marty Jackley said, quote, "Briley Piper has refused to take responsibility or show any remorse for the heinous murder of Chester Poage 25 years ago. The court's ruling is a step forward in carrying out the jury's verdict and assuring that the Poage family receives justice." And if you recall on a previous episode, I'd said that I was a new mom during this resentencing. Oh, yeah. Like,
hormones are high.
I still remember I called my sister on my way to the courthouse. I had dropped off my child with a babysitter, and I called my sister and I said, I literally could have quit my job that day. I was like, I am headed to the courthouse to sit in a courtroom with an admitted murderer, and my beautiful baby is with a babysitter. Like, it was just, and she's like, are you going to be okay? Like, Julie, you're going to have to wipe the tears before you walk into the courtroom. But I was a new mom, and to be sitting in the courtroom with the victim's mom and the defendant's mom, and to have this realization of how awful it would be to be the mom of the person who suffered the way Chester Allan Poage suffered, but also to think
be the mom of the person who inflicted that.
It would be worse to be the mom of the person who could do that to another human being, right? So that's the case. Immediately when we pulled the topic out of the hat, it's always what comes to mind, because I remember the mom being there, and I remember what came out about things about his childhood, and it doesn't even begin to excuse the actions. And I've always had a heart for the Poage family. But that's the story, and that's why it's stuck.
Too, Briley's fighting for his life.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Yep.
But I'm sure Chester pleaded for his.
Oh, many times.
Yeah.
And the evidence, all the news articles and from that time, we'll talk about that because after these crimes were committed, it was they were robbing him and then decided like we really don't want to have a witness. That's basically, long story short, how it worked. And he just pleaded like I won't say anything, but didn't matter. And it was horrible. It was a hard one to cover. That was one of the hardest ones I ever had to cover. Yeah.
I bet.
Yeah. Your turn.
Well, I was going to say time for a palate cleanser, but no.
Yours isn't a palate cleanser.
No. I'm going to cover the co-ed killer.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, you probably have.
You think so?
Edmund Kemper.
Okay, it sounds familiar.
Serial killer back in the 60s or 70s. Okay. So this story has been covered a ton. He's an infamous.
He's still alive. I do know the name, but I don't know the specifics.
Okay. So I'll give you some details. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the actual murders. It's just more of the things that happened to him that led to these behaviors, because that was our topic, right? So if you have not seen Netflix's Mindhunter series, it's outstanding.
I can guarantee I'm not going to be watching this. Not if I have to be home alone at night.
Cameron Britton portrays Ed Kemper in prison. And this is based on what really happened when the FBI started criminally profiling, learning how to profile heinous, so serial killers and things like that. Ed Kemper is such a brilliant human being. His IQ is 145. He's really, 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 really intelligent.
Wasn't Ted Bundy also very intelligent?
Also. I don't think as smart as high as Ed Kemper, but
okay.
But this is just a really good example of how victimization early can turn some people into completely horrific criminals. And I think it's a means of, in your case, there are so many parallels with our stories. It's really wild today.
Okay.
But I feel like it's a means of trying to get their power back from a history of abuse. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean, we talk about that in terms of when women are catty with each other or something. And, it's I just don't believe tearing someone down can build you up. Mm-hmm. It's not an equal exchange.
Right.
You build someone up, you also build yourself up.
Right.
But when you're young and damaged and your brain's still developing and you've been subjected to these horrific things, especially in his case, just consistent bombardment, he was also a larger person.
Okay.
So that's going to play into it, a parallel. So
interesting. Yeah.
Ed Kemper, born on December 18th, 1948, by the way. December 18th is my mom's birthday. Interesting coincidence. I'm not saying she's a serial killer.
You are not.
I am not. No, I'm not. She is not, to my knowledge, a serial killer. Okay.
She's not.
Ed Kemper was born in Burbank, California, and his early life, like we've already established, was pretty unstable. His parents' marriage was portrayed as a war zone. His mom, Claire Nell, was a raging alcoholic, and some sources think maybe she had borderline personality disorder, which can be really, really, really difficult to deal with if you've ever had to deal with that. His dad, also Edmund Sr., was a World War II veteran, and he was once quoted as saying, "Suicide missions in wartime and the later atomic bomb testings were nothing compared to living with Claire Nell." So his wife was very, very difficult. So that just gives you a little picture into their tumultuous relationship, right? He worked as an electrician to provide for his family. She was just critical about everything, cutting him down, ridiculed him for a menial job, and just, emasculating him constantly. And then she also, as a mother, refused to show Ed affection. He was her only son. And she had this fear that being affectionate toward him would cause him to turn gay.
Oh,
I don't know how that works.
Okay.
But in her mind, that's how it would work. So it was around this time, constantly under attack by his mother, that he started decapitating his sister's dolls. And he talked about this. I mean, it's just interesting, these tapes with this man. He's so just factual about everything. Like he can analyze it and analyze his own behaviors, and he would talk about like the popping sound of decapitating the sisters' dolls, and it became like, yes, there became like this like sexual arousal to that sound because it was also gratifying at getting revenge at his mother. So again, when the brain is forming, these things, just wires get crossed and things happen. And it's kind of like the cheese guy that we talked about. Something happened where wires got crossed and Swiss cheese became
the turn on.
Yeah. So his parents eventually divorced when Ed was 9, and Clarnell took Ed and his sisters, I think he had 3 sisters, moved to Montana, 2 or 3. She'd already been critical, very, very critical towards Ed, but now without a husband, he seemed to be like a reminder of her failed marriage, and so she just took it out on him frequently. She berated him just like she used to do to his dad, mocked him constantly about his size. This guy ended up being 6'9".
Wow.
So even like looking at pictures of them as little kids, he's not little. So I imagine he, like you said, represents more of an adult to her.
Yeah.
And this husband who left her, she's taken it out on him. And she often doled out cruel and unusual punishments for no reason at all, simply for things he might do one day. So again, a lot of parallels in our stories. Maybe they were sisters. I don't know. But like she would assume he couldn't be trusted around his sisters, so she'd lock him in the basement to sleep. She treated him like an animal. And of course, he said, yeah, it made me feel unwanted. She also would tell him things like no woman would ever want him. So now he's like got a lot of women and girl and, issues. So this lack of affection, positive attention, lack of a positive attention was not a good thing. And in addition to decapitating his sister's dolls, he started fantasizing about killing his mother. He also abused and murdered family pets, buried one cat alive, butchered another with a knife. And it was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy because his mom was always claiming, anything he might do, he started doing these things. And so she sent him away to live with his biological father at age 13 because of these actions. And then he became like, he started bouncing around. So dad sends him back to mom, who then sent him to live with dad's parents. Nobody wants him, right? So now he's in a farm, grandparents' farm in Norfolk, California. And here he amplified his slaughter of innocent animals. His grandfather taught him to shoot. And so he was just slaughtering anything he could get his rifle sight on. And so they took his rifle away. And the problem with living with his grandparents, even though it's his paternal grandparents, was that his grandmother was very similar to his mom. Okay. So she was very domineering, very controlling and critical. And one day, he just needed to make the problem go away. So he shot and killed her in the kitchen of the farmhouse. And then logically, very logically, so that his grandfather wouldn't see this, he waited patiently until Grandpa came home from his job. He shot and killed Grandpa, and then he hid the body. And then he called his mom calmly and just said, "This is what I've done." She said, "You call the police right now," which he did. So he's still very young, and they send him to the California Youth Authority, and they run the gamut of tests on him, determine he's suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. I saw nothing else about that, but I don't know. I think his mom was just in his head. That's my personal opinion.
I think you would desperately try to put a label on that, right? Like, even if it's not the right label.
Right.
Something has to
so it just didn't fit to me, but I'm also not a person who determines these things.
Right.
So Ed was eventually sent to a Atascadero State Hospital, which was a maximum security facility for mentally ill convicts, and he stayed there until he was 21. Okay. They let him out in 1969. His psychiatric doctors advised against him living with his mother because of how much of a trigger and antagonistic she was. They didn't think, okay, they're letting him out, but we've got to control the environment, so you cannot live with your mom, but he did anyway. So she was working at the University of California, Santa Cruz. While he was living with her, he took on a variety of jobs while attending community college. He really wanted to be a state trooper, but he got rejected because of his size.
Oh.
And I'm guessing major liability at 300 pounds, 6'9". I mean, I just saw my husband a little bit ago, and he said he had to take someone to the ground today. I can imagine, and my husband's not a giant guy. If a 6'9", I mean, I just imagine there's a bigger liability there. So
Or they saw some weird things about him and found a different excuse.
Oh, no.
Really?
Oh, no. The law enforcement guys loved him. They would hang out at the same bars. They were all friends. They'd call him Big Ed. They would talk about cases together. Oh, no. He was this big, gentle giant in their eyes. Very amiable.
Not gentle to the kitten he killed at his farmhouse
or
whatever it was.
Just wait. So Ed eventually, now he's buddies with the cops and he's, doing all this stuff. He's in a motorcycle accident, which leaves him unable to work for a while. So with the insurance proceeds, he buys a new car, and then he loads the car with a kill kit. So he's got like a knife, handcuffs, gun, and he begins pursuing female hitchhikers.
Yeah.
So he picks up women, and at first it's like he's attempting to build a rapport and have some type of friendship,
relationship,
because his mom never gave him that opportunity, So he did this hundreds of times. There were hundreds of women who not got away, but never were in danger because he's learning how to, And then one day he had a row with his mom earlier in the day. He snaps. He murders his first victim. I won't go into all the details because so many other places cover what he does, but he goes on to murder 6 female college students. That's the moniker, the co-ed killer.
Yeah.
Some of the similarities, he would dismember their bodies. He would rape their corpses. Some of the victims' heads he would bury in his mother's yard. And he said, this is the only kind of, it's not funny, but to him it was. He would bury them with their faces up because his mom always wanted people looking up at her. So it's like his mom was his demon. It's just really, yeah. She had done a number on him, and he was fueled by such hatred for her. So these poor women took the brunt of it until he finally decided to take out his mother so she couldn't torment him any longer. So he bludgeoned, dismembered, raped her skull, and then he removed her tongue and larynx and put them down the garbage disposal because she was always so critical to him. So it was very symbolic of like, I am going to put a final point in this so she can never berate me again.
I hope I don't dream about this tonight.
I'm sorry. I did after doing this. I actually did. Yes. And then he called his mom's best friend to come over thinking that he could sell the story that mom and BFF like went off on a trip or something. So she comes over, he strangles her to death, and then he was done. He knew he was done. He called the police on himself, and they're all like, no way, Big Ed. He gave them all the evidence. He didn't fight them. They were able to solve all the co-ed murders. He received 8 concurrent life sentences. He's in prison to this day at 72 years old or whatever. And even though loss of life is always tragic, again, there was something positive to come out of this because it was his intellect and ability for that self-analysis that FBI learned to profile serial killers. So, yeah. And I think I recall from, I didn't see it again doing this research, but I remember hearing it. He was so intelligent that while in either the psychiatric hospital or in prison, the psychiatrist would, because he could hack the tests. And he would help analyze tests of other people. That's how, yeah.
It's a little bit Silence of the Lambs like, huh?
Very much.
Yeah.
So it's just a story like that, sometimes these monsters aren't born. They can be made by conditioning and the things they're, again, not an excuse at all.
No.
But definitely he was a victim. And I will show you this picture so you can see just how effing giant this guy was. Can you imagine?
Well, if he wanted to
like
hurt
nobody
lots of
could
people,
get
he
away
could've.
from him.
Yeah.
Not a single person could get away from him. Anyway.
My husband studied criminal justice in school and thinking that he might want to be a detective one day, and then he ended up switching gears and became a firefighter and EMT. But he has talked a lot about, the profiling that has been done and how a lot of it does have to do with mothers. And
well, if I become a serial killer, you're going to know why. No, I'm kidding.
I just think
my dad. Never mind. I'm not even going to get into it.
Strangely speaks to how important moms are.
Yeah.
Right? Like
Or like when they're cold or whatever, like that. I think we've talked about it on here, that realization of how, as a child, I hugged my kids, but when they became adults, like
it became more weird.
It was uncomfortable. And my daughter called me on it one day, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not comfortable hugging you, which is weird. And I had to think about that. And I'm like, oh, my mom's not a hugger. Yeah. She's not affectionate. So, yeah.
I'm a hugger.
I know.
Now I have a teenager who's not as likely to hug.
Yeah.
Which does kind of
come
make
back
me
around.
sad. I hope so.
Yeah, they will.
Well, and now he's taller than me, so if he does hug me, it's kind of just to show
seen him for a while.
It's just to show me how much taller he is.
Just wait, one day they're both going to be taller than you.
Well, this one was full of not the fun facts, but the other kind of effed facts, right?
A lot of effed facts.
A lot of them. That was a tough escape bite.
So sorry.
Tough escape bite, but always interesting. So that's going to do it for us for now.
Okay.
We'll talk to you again next time.